Imagine this read in a cinematic voiceover, soft and ominous, leading into suspense. Welcome, seekers of mysteries, wanderers of time, and witnesses of forgotten truths. Today you stand at the threshold of a story, unlike any other, a story that has haunted deserts, puzzled scholars, and whispered across centuries. Imagine an army, 50,000 strong, warriors, commanders, servants, horses, all marching beneath the blazing sun, carrying dreams of conquest, of glory, of destiny. And then, nothing. No return, no survivors, only silence. History tells us they vanished into the sands, as if swallowed by the earth itself. But was it fate, a curse, a storm sent by gods, or something more sinister? You are about to journey into one of the greatest enigmas the ancient world ever recorded, the vanishing of an army, so vast it could have changed empires, yet left behind no trace. As you watch, you will question the very boundaries between myth and truth, history and legend. So, open your mind, prepare your heart, for what you are about to witness may forever alter the way you see the past, and the shadows it casts on our present. The story begins now. Picture this 50,000 men, armored and armed, banners flapping in the desert wind. Their leader, proud and unyielding, drives them forward. Step by step they vanish into the horizon. Days pass, weeks pass, then, nothing. No messengers, no bones, no echoes, just a silence that screams louder than any battle cry. Imagine the horror of those who waited for them, the families who never saw their sons return, the empire robbed of its strength in one unfathomable instant, an entire force, gone, swallowed whole by an invisible hand. Was it a storm, violent enough to bury men alive beneath mountains of shifting sand? Was it betrayal, where guides led them into oblivion? Or was it something else, a secret buried so deep that even time itself has failed to reveal it? Tonight, we walk into the desert with them. We retrace their path, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. Together, we will unravel this unsolved mystery that has baffled historians for more than 2,000 years. Stay with me, because the truth may be far stranger than any legend you've ever heard. The scorching sun hung mercilessly above the horizon, painting the desert in shimmering waves of gold and fire. The sound of thousands of feet echoed against the barren land, 50,000 men, armored and weary, marching forward in a single, unending river of steel and determination. Dust rose from beneath their sandals, clinging to their faces, their armor, their very souls. It was a march of glory, commanded by an emperor's ambition, and led by men who believed themselves chosen by destiny. At the head of this mighty host rode General Artemion, a seasoned warrior, with scars etched across his face like maps of old battles. His eyes were sharp, unyielding, carrying the weight of not just victory, but survival. By his side marched Darius, a young scribe, tasked with recording every step, his scrolls already heavy with words of pride and prophecy. The soldiers' chants carried through the desert air, proud but strained. Some whispered of omens, strange winds, the cries of unseen voices at night. Others laughed, brushing away superstition with the arrogance of steel. Yet, beneath the bravado, an unease stirred, silent but undeniable. Artemion looked to the endless horizon. "We march for conquest," he declared to his captains, his voice steady, though the sun burned like fire. "The gods themselves will witness our triumph." But as the army pressed deeper into the desert, the world around them seemed to shift. The air grew heavy, almost alive. Whispers of sandstorms carried on the wind, like the voices of the damned. The soldiers tightened their grips on their spears. The desert was not a passive land, it was watching, waiting. Darius, ink-stained fingers trembling, wrote down the scene. "The desert breathes like a beast beneath our feet. The men are restless, though their hearts beat with courage. General Artemion does not falter, he leads us into the unknown." As night fell, the sky transformed into a sea of stars, cold and indifferent to the mortal struggle below. The army lit their torches, flames flickering in defiance against the vast darkness. Shadows stretched across the dunes, twisting like spirits, and in the silence of that first night, a whisper rose, no one could say from where. Some claimed it was the wind, others swore it was the voice of the gods, but all who heard it felt the same. The desert was not empty. The march had begun, but with every step, unseen eyes followed. The fate of 50,000 men was sealed, long before the sand swallowed their footprints. The second day of the march brought with it a silence that unnerved even the bravest warriors. The desert stretched endlessly, its dunes shifting like living giants under the breath of unseen winds. The army pressed forward, but the rhythm of footsteps was no longer steady, it faltered with unease. General Artemian rode at the vanguard, his sharp eyes scanning the horizon. No sign of enemies, no villages, only a land of silence, broken by the occasional cry of a raven overhead. The soldiers muttered prayers under their breath, their confidence beginning to erode beneath the desert's oppressive weight. That night, when the torches were lit and the men gathered around campfires, the whispers began. No one could say where they came from. At first they were soft, like grains of sand brushing against one another. But as the wind rose, the whispers grew into voices. Darius leaned close to the fire, ink and parchment trembling in his hands. "Do you hear it, General?" he asked, his voice tight. Artemian frowned. "The wind tricks the weak-minded, right of our strength, not the desert's illusions." Yet even he could not fully mask the chill that ran down his spine. In the shadows of the dunes, the soldiers murmured. Some swore they heard names being called, their names. Others claimed to hear the cries of women and children, long dead. Fear slithered through the camp like a serpent. Men who had fought battles without flinching now clutched their spears with trembling hands. The whispers did not fade. They grew stronger, circling the camp like predators testing prey. Sleep became impossible. Horses stamped and snorted nervously, their eyes wide and gleaming in the firelight. Then came the omen. One of the scouts stumbled back into camp, pale as death. His words barely formed. The sand, it moved. The men rushed to the edge of camp, where the scout pointed. Under the moonlight, the dunes seemed alive, shifting not with the wind but with purpose. The surface rippled as if something vast lurked beneath, waiting. Panic threatened to seize the army. General Artemian raised his sword high, its blade catching the firelight. "Stand firm," he roared. "The desert is not our enemy. It is only a path, nothing more." The men obeyed, though their eyes betrayed terror. The whispers echoed still, soft yet undeniable, threading through their minds like a haunting song. Darius scribbled one final line before rolling his scroll shut with trembling hands. "The desert speaks, and its voice is not kind." Dawn broke, but it brought no comfort. The desert sky bled orange and red as the sun clawed its way upward, and the army resumed its march. The air was thick, heavy, as if the land itself pressed down upon the men's shoulders. What had once been a march of pride now dragged with unease. At midday, the soldiers halted to drink from their dwindling water supplies. The heat shimmered across the horizon, warping the dunes like shifting illusions. Then, out of the silence, a cry pierced the air, a raven's shriek, sharp and unrelenting. Heads turned skyward. A black raven circled above, its wings slicing through the desert sky. In ancient lore, ravens were messengers of death, omens of disaster. The men grew still, their whispers taut with fear. General Artemian narrowed his eyes at the bird. "It is only a scavenger," he said firmly. Though his jaw tightened, he gestured to the men. "Eat, drink, and march." But the raven did not leave. It followed them. Hour after hour, it circled overhead, its shadow gliding across the sand like a specter. Each caw struck deeper into the soldiers' hearts, echoing louder than the clash of swords they had once known. Darius walked close to the general, scribbling every detail. "The men say the bird is cursed, General, that it follows us to witness our doom." Artemian did not answer. Instead, he stared at the endless horizon, his face carved in stone. Yet in his silence, Darius sensed something, a crack in the general's iron resolve. As night descended, the army built its camp. The raven landed on a dune, just beyond the firelight, its black eyes reflecting the flames. Soldiers crossed themselves, muttered prayers, and avoided its gaze. Suddenly, one man, desperate to banish his fear, raised his bow and loosed an arrow. The raven took flight, screeching into the darkness. A cheer rose from the camp. Relief washed over the men, but it was short-lived. At dawn, when the first rays of sunlight spread across the sand, the raven returned. Perched atop a spear left in the earth, it stared at the army as though mocking them. Darius wrote with trembling hands, "The raven is no bird. It is a shadow cast by fate, a herald of what lies ahead." The men no longer marched with songs or chants. Silence followed them now, punctuated only by the beating wings above. The desert had given them its first omen, and though Artemion ordered the men forward, not even he could deny that death had found its herald. The fourth day brought a change, a stillness so unnatural that even the soldiers dared not speak above a whisper. The wind, once a constant companion in the desert, had died entirely. No breeze, no shifting sand. The silence pressed in like a suffocating hand. General Artemion's brow furrowed. He had fought wars across mountains and seas, yet never had he felt the air itself watching him. He rode forward, urging the men to quicken their pace, but the land resisted them. Each step into the dunes was heavier, as though the desert wished to root them in place. By midday the first signs appeared, a faint tremor along the horizon. Not the shimmer of heat, but movement. Darius shaded his eyes and stared. A wall of sand rose in the distance, stretching from earth to sky, vast as an ocean wave. "The desert breathes," Darius whispered, scribbling furiously. The men halted, their murmurs rising. Fear crackled through the ranks. Veterans who had faced blades without flinching now stared at the oncoming storm with wide, helpless eyes. Artemion raised his hand for silence. "It is only wind," he declared, his voice carrying across the ranks. "No storm will break us. Tighten the lines, shield the weak." The soldiers scrambled, drawing cloths over their faces, clutching shields, as if they might guard against the fury of the desert itself. Horses neighed and stamped, their instincts screaming of danger. Then the storm struck. The world turned to chaos. Sand tore across the camp like shards of glass, stinging skin, blinding eyes. Torches were ripped from their posts, fires extinguished in an instant. As men screamed, as they lost sight of one another, swallowed by a wall of swirling gold and red. Darius fell to his knees, his scroll ripped from his grasp, parchment vanishing into the storm. He clutched at the sand, desperate to record the horror, but ink bled away with the wind. Through the maelstrom he saw Artemion, cloak whipping, sword raised defiantly against the storm, as though it were an enemy to be slain. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time meant nothing in the storm's grip. The sky vanished, the ground vanished, and only the endless roar remained. And then, as suddenly as it came, the storm was gone. The silence returned, heavier than before. When the soldiers gathered again, many were missing. Supplies had been swallowed by the desert, lost forever. And there, on the horizon, the raven circled once more. Darius, coughing sand from his lungs, managed to scratch one final line onto salvaged parchment. "The storm is no storm. It is a warning, and yet we march deeper still." The army staggered on after the storm, battered but unbroken. Supplies were lighter, tempers shorter, and the whispers heavier. Yet General Artemion forced his men forward, driven by a vision of conquest that even the desert could not extinguish. But the desert was not finished testing them. At dusk, Artemion summoned a group of scouts. "Ride ahead," he ordered, pointing toward the jagged dunes that rose like teeth on the horizon. "We need water, shelter, anything. Return by dawn." The scouts saluted and disappeared into the sea of sand, their figures swallowed by the twilight. That night, the camp was restless. Fires flickered weakly, their light too fragile against the vast star-strewn sky. Darius sat near Artemion, scribbling by torchlight, though his hands shook. "General, The men whisper that the storm was a curse, that the raven is a harbinger. They are afraid. Artemian's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. Fear is a poison, he said, and I will not allow it to spread. We march with steel in our hands, not shadows in our hearts. But as dawn painted the desert in cold gold, no scouts returned. The hours passed. Soldiers strained their eyes across the dunes, searching for movement. None came. By midday, Artemian sent another party of riders to find them. The men returned pale and shaken, bringing no scouts, only news. Their tracks lead into the dunes, the captain reported, but they end, as though the sand swallowed them whole. A hush fell across the camp. Men clutched their weapons, glancing at the desert with new suspicion. Artemian clenched his jaw, refusing to yield to dread. Scouts can lose their way. Perhaps a storm covered their trail. We do not bend to superstition. His voice was sharp, commanding, but his eyes betrayed the storm within him. That night, unease thickened like smoke. Soldiers whispered of spirits, of gods angry at their march. Some swore they saw shadows moving along the dunes. Horses snorted, stamping nervously. Darius, ever faithful to his task, recorded the fear. His quill scratched across parchment. The desert devours the brave. Scouts vanish, as though stolen by unseen hands. The army marches, but each man wonders, when will it be his turn? As the camp settled into uneasy silence, a scream tore through the night. Men rushed to the edge of the camp, but found nothing, only the empty desert, rippling under moonlight. The army was learning a truth it could no longer deny. The desert did not merely resist them, it hunted them. The desert sun blazed like a merciless god, and the soldiers' lips cracked under its wrath. After the vanishing of the scouts, Artemion pushed the army forward, desperate for water. When at last a cluster of dry wells was discovered amid crumbling ruins, a cry of hope surged through the men. They rushed to the stone mouths of the wells, lowering skins and buckets. The ropes came back empty. Again and again they tried, but each well gave nothing, only hollow echoes rising from the darkness below. The earth itself seemed to mock their thirst. The soldiers groaned in despair. Some cursed the gods. Others whispered that the wells had once flowed, but were cursed when the land turned against them. Darius stood at the edge of one well, staring into its darkness. His reflection, faint in the shadows, seemed distorted. Eyes too wide, mouth twisted in a silent scream. He staggered back, heart pounding. General Artemion refused to allow panic. We ration what remains, he barked. We endure. Yet he knew their water skins were nearly empty. Thirst gnawed at even the strongest men. As night fell, the raven appeared once more, perched upon a broken column of the ruins. Its caw cut through the silence like a blade. The men averted their eyes. Darius dipped his quill. The wells are dry, hope drains with them. The desert does not give, it only takes. Sleep that night was thin and restless. Some soldiers rose to search the ruins, whispering of hidden springs. None returned with water, only silence and the endless cries of the raven above. The desert grew colder than steel as the sun fell, plunging the camp into a silence more suffocating than the day's heat. The men huddled around their small fires, guarding their dwindling supplies, but no warmth or comfort could reach their hearts. It began with a scream. A soldier on watch staggered back, claiming he had seen figures moving among the dunes. Not men, shadows, shapes taller than any soldier, gliding without sound, their outlines dissolving with the wind. Artemion dismissed it as fear, but soon more men swore the same. They are watching us, one whispered, eyes wide with terror. Darius's quill scratched furiously. The desert does not sleep. It moves in the night, unseen, untouchable. As the hours passed, the shadows came closer. Horses shrieked, their reins snapping as they bolted into the darkness, never to be seen again. Men clutched their weapons but dared not step beyond the circle of firelight. Then the voices returned, the same whispers from the second night, louder now, wrapping around the camp like a suffocating fog. The men covered their ears, but the voices crawled inside their minds. One soldier broke. With a cry he ran into the dunes, chasing the whispers. Others tried to stop him, but he vanished into the dark as though swallowed whole. Artemion rose, his sword drawn, silhouetted against the flames. "Hold your ground," he roared, but even his voice seemed small against the vastness of the night. Darius's ink blurred with his tears as he wrote, "Shadows walk among us. The desert does not fight with steel, it fights with fear." By dawn, the camp was smaller. Men had vanished, taken by madness, or the night itself, and once again perched on the dunes, the raven watched. The army was breaking. After nights of whispers and shadows, men no longer walked with the strength of soldiers, but with the weariness of the condemned. Every step dragged, every breath labored, their throats raw from thirst. The once mighty host of 50,000 now felt like a herd being led into slaughter. By midday, disaster struck again. A column of men marching along the left flank suddenly cried out. The sand beneath them shifted, not like a dune sliding, but as if the ground itself had opened. In an instant, dozens of soldiers sank into the earth. They screamed, clawing at the air, but the sand swallowed them faster than water swallows a stone. Artemion spurred his horse forward, shouting orders. Ropes were thrown, hands stretched, but one by one, the soldiers vanished beneath the dunes. When the sand finally stilled, nothing remained. No bodies, no weapons, no trace. The men recoiled in horror. Some fell to their knees, clutching amulets, begging the gods for mercy. Others stared blankly, their courage gone. Darius scribbled with trembling hands, "The desert eats the living. Its belly is never full." That night, the camp was silent. No chants, no laughter, no talk of home. Only the crackle of dying fires and the hollow eyes of men who no longer believed they would see another dawn. Above them, as always, the raven circled. The night after the desert's hunger, something more dangerous than the sand itself began to stir rebellion. In hushed circles, men whispered of turning back. They had lost too many to storms, to shadows, to the earth itself. Their supplies were thin, their hope thinner. What was conquest worth when the desert itself had become an enemy? General Artemion sat at the heart of the camp, sharpening his blade by the fire. His captains approached with troubled faces. "The men are restless," one said. "They speak of retreat. If we force them onward, they may break." Artemion's scarred face hardened. A broken army returns home in shame. A broken army is no army at all. We march forward. But even Darius saw the flicker of doubt in the general's eyes. The scribe dipped his quill. Steel commands, but shadows rule. The army bends, and soon it may shatter. That night, a fight erupted among the soldiers. Two men came to blows over a water skin, their shouts echoing across the camp. Others joined, rage spilling from them like poison. In the chaos, one soldier was stabbed, his body falling limp into the dust. Artemion stormed into the fray, blade drawn. "Enough," he roared, his voice thundering above the shouts. "We are not beasts. We are warriors." His command silenced them, but the silence was brittle. The men returned to their fires, but their eyes burned with anger and betrayal. No longer did they look to Artemion with respect, but with suspicion. As the night deepened, the whispers returned, though this time they came not only from the dunes, but from the men themselves. Rebellion was no longer a fear. It was a seed, planted in thirsty soil, and in the distance, the raven sat upon a dune, unmoving, as though waiting for the army to devour itself. The march dragged on in bitter silence. The rebellion had been contained, but the men no longer saw their general as a leader chosen by destiny, only as a man dragging them into doom. Their steps grew slower, their eyes more hollow. On the horizon, the ruins of a structure emerged from the dunes, pillars half buried in sand, broken walls rising like skeletal remains. A murmur ran through the ranks. Hope. Perhaps this shrine would offer water, shade, a blessing from the gods. General Artemion raised his hand, signaling the halt. He dismounted and led his captains into the ruins, with Darius close behind, scroll in hand. Inside, the air was cooler, shadows dancing across ancient carvings etched into the stone. The reliefs told of sacrifices, men bound and lowered into pits of sand, women wailing at their sides, priests with arms raised toward a burning sky. Darius felt his chest tighten. "This place is not holy," he whispered. "Yes." Cursed. Artemion ignored him, commanding the men to search, but the soldiers returned with nothing. No water, no food, only bones brittle as dust. The shrine had not been built for salvation, but for death. As night fell, the raven perched atop a crumbled column, its call echoing through the ruins like a mocking laugh. Darius dipped his pen into the ink and scrawled, "The gods once ruled here. They demanded blood. Perhaps they still do." The men slept uneasily, their dreams haunted by the carved faces on the walls. One awoke screaming, swearing that he had seen those stone eyes move. When dawn came, 2 soldiers were missing. Their footprints led not out of the shrine, but into the sand pits carved long ago. And once more, the desert gave no return. By the 11th day, the army was no longer a disciplined host. It was a storm of men held together only by fear of the general's wrath. Supplies were gone, their bodies weakened, and hope had bled dry in the sand. That night, as torches sputtered low, a group of soldiers gathered in secret. Their whispers were filled with venom. "Artemion has doomed us," one spat. "The desert takes us because he leads us into its jaws." Another growled, "Better we kill him and turn back, than die like beasts." Darius, moving silently through the camp, overheard them. His heart pounded. Should he warn Artemion, or let fate run its course? His loyalty battled his fear. Before dawn, the mutineers acted. They rushed toward the general's tent, blades drawn, eyes wild with desperation. But Artemion was ready. His captains intercepted, steel clashing under moonlight. The desert itself seemed to watch as brother fought brother. The fight was brutal but short. The mutiny was crushed, the rebels cut down where they stood. Their bodies were dragged to the dunes, left to vanish with the wind. At dawn, Artemion addressed his men, his scarred face cold as stone. "There will be no rebellion. There will be no retreat. Those who defy me defy the empire itself. We march, or we die." His words rang with iron, but the soldiers' eyes betrayed only bitterness. Obedience remained, but it was the obedience of prisoners, not loyal warriors. Darius wrote with a trembling hand, "Steel has silenced rebellion, but steel cannot silence despair." The men follow, but not with their hearts. The raven circled overhead, its shadow crossing the camp as though sealing their fate. The army marched on in grim silence after the failed mutiny, but now, even the desert itself seemed to mock their steps. The dunes shifted in unnatural patterns, ridges forming overnight where none had stood, valleys appearing as though carved by invisible hands. Scouts sent to track their progress swore they had returned to the same ground, though they had marched for hours. The desert was folding in on them, turning paths into circles. By midday, panic struck. A company of 30 men vanished after cresting a dune barely a mile ahead. Their comrades followed, but found only smooth, untouched sand. No footprints, no sign of men or armor. The soldiers recoiled in horror. Some cursed the gods, others broke down in sobs. Darius scribbled frantically, "The dunes shift like water, they swallow without trace. The desert bends not to men, but to some darker will." That night, the men heard voices again, but these were not whispers, these were screams. Shrieks of the lost echoing across the dunes as though the vanished soldiers still cried for help from beneath the sands. General Artemion ordered silence, demanded discipline, but even his captains avoided his gaze. His authority was crumbling, not from rebellion, but from despair. Darius could not sleep. He sat by the dying fire, ink running across parchment in hurried scrawls. "We are no longer marching through the desert, we are trapped inside it." The raven, as always, was there, its wings spread wide, as if claiming dominion over their souls. Sleep had become dangerous. Men woke screaming, thrashing against unseen enemies. Others did not wake at all, found dead in their tents, faces twisted in silent terror. The whispers now invaded dreams, dragging the soldiers into nightmares from which some never returned. By the 13th day, madness stalked the army openly. A soldier began laughing uncontrollably during the march, his eyes wild, his lips cracked with blood. He ripped off his armor, screaming, "The sand is calling me." Before anyone could stop him, he ran naked into the dunes, vanishing into the horizon. The men froze, horrified. Some muttered prayers, others clutched charms, but all felt the same dread. The desert was not only killing them, it was consuming their minds. Artemion tried to rally the host. "You are warriors of the empire," he roared, "not slaves to fear." Yet his words carried little weight. The soldiers' hollow eyes reflected not loyalty, but resignation. That night, a soldier crept through the camp, muttering to himself. He carried a torch, setting tents ablaze before anyone could stop him. Flames spread through the camp, men screaming as they scrambled to save supplies. The saboteur was caught, eyes glazed with madness. "They told me to burn it," he whispered. "The voices told me." The soldiers trembled, not at him, but at what had commanded him. Darius dipped his quill. Madness spreads like fire. The desert's true weapon is not hunger or thirst, it is despair. The fire was extinguished, but the damage was done. Supplies were lost, trust was broken, and men began to look at one another as if any could be the next to fall to madness. High above the smoke, the ravens circled once more, cawing into the night. By the 14th day, even the wind had turned against them. What little breeze the desert offered came foul and heavy, carrying with it a stench that clung to the men's throats. Some gagged, others coughed until blood spotted their lips. At first, they thought it the decay of some long-buried beast uncovered by shifting sands. But as the wind strengthened, its poison grew sharper. Men collapsed, clutching their chests, gasping as though invisible hands strangled them. General Artemion ordered cloth soaked in the last of their water and tied around mouths and noses. It saved some, but it drained precious reserves. Desperation set in deeper. Every sip of water now tasted like sacrifice. Darius pressed the cloth over his own face, eyes burning from the foul air. He wrote shakily, "The wind itself is cursed. It does not cool, it kills." That night, the poison faded, leaving only exhaustion and dread. The men huddled closer to the fires, but no warmth could chase the thought that even the air had turned against them. And once more, the raven returned, gliding low over the camp as though savoring the army's slow unraveling. By the 15th night, the army was no longer whole. Fires burned in weak clusters instead of a great camp. As men refused to gather together, trust had rotted. Fear had taken its place. Artemion stood at the center of what remained, staring at his scattered host. The rebellion he had crushed still lingered in their eyes. They obeyed his orders, but only out of fear. His iron grip on discipline was slipping, replaced by a fragile thread. Darius sat close, writing by the faint light of a dying torch. "We are not an army, we are fragments, scattered like sand. Each man now walks alone." Then it began. A soldier rose in the night, shouting at the dunes, swearing he saw his dead brother calling from beyond the firelight. Others followed, seeing loved ones, wives, children, mothers, beckoning them. They staggered into the dark, their comrades too broken to stop them. By dawn, dozens were gone. Their places in the circle lay empty. The survivors clung tighter to what remained of the camp, but no one dared sleep. Fear had eaten even the small comfort of rest. Artemion gathered his captains, his voice harsh. "We cannot allow this to continue. They must be bound if they wander." The captains looked at one another, reluctant. Binding their own men felt less like discipline and more like cruelty, yet they obeyed. That night, men slept with ropes at their wrists, tied to one another. But the desert was not finished. Those who slept screamed in terror, thrashing so violently that the ropes cut into their skin. By morning some wrists were bloodied raw, and the bonds did nothing to hold back madness. The camp was broken, no longer a circle of strength, but a prison of despair. And upon a dune, the raven sat watching, as if tallying the dead. By the 16th day, silence had become more terrifying than screams. The army, what remained of it, dragged itself forward. No chants, no cries, not even whispers. The desert had stolen even their voices. At midday, the men stopped. Ahead lay a field of dunes that seemed strangely smooth, as if no wind had touched them. The surface glistened faintly under the sun, shimmering like glass. The soldiers hesitated. Something about the dunes felt wrong, unnatural. They seemed too still, too perfect. General Artemian barked for them to move, but even his captains hesitated. Finally, a small group obeyed and stepped onto the dunes. Their feet sank slightly into the sand, and for a moment all seemed normal. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. The dunes shifted. Shapes rose beneath the surface, long and serpentine. In an instant, the soldiers screamed as the ground swallowed them whole, their cries muffled in seconds. The rest of the army recoiled, horror frozen on their faces. Not one man dared step forward again. Artemian's jaw clenched. "We move around," he commanded. Though his voice cracked, for the first time, his men heard not a leader, but a man afraid. That night, no one slept. The dunes remained behind them, glowing faintly under the moon, as though watching. Darius wrote with trembling hand, "Even the sand itself lives. The desert is not ground beneath our feet. It is a beast waiting to feed." And above the dunes, the raven circled, black against the silver sky. By the 17th day, the army stumbled upon what seemed like salvation, a structure rising from the dunes, half buried in sand. Stone pillars leaned like broken teeth, and an entrance yawned open into darkness. Relief surged through the men. Shelter, shade, perhaps water. General Artemian ordered a halt. "Inside," he commanded, his voice regaining its steel. Torches were lit, flickering against the carved walls. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, and for a moment, hope flickered. Soldiers pressed forward eagerly, but then they saw the walls. Carvings lined the stone. Armies marching into the desert, their figures swallowed by sand, their faces twisted in agony. In the final panel, only ravens remained, perched upon the dunes. Darius's voice shook. This is us." The men murmured nervously, fear spreading. Artemian silenced them with a glare, but even he could not deny the carvings mirrored their fate. In the central chamber lay piles of bones, brittle and broken, helmets, swords, shields, all from ages past. Armies that had come before, seeking conquest, now reduced to dust. The soldiers recoiled. Some dropped their weapons. One fell to his knees, weeping. "We march into death," he cried. "This tomb is proof." Artemian struck him down with the flat of his blade. "We are not bones yet. We march forward." His voice thundered, but desperation trembled beneath it. That night, the men refused to sleep inside the tomb. They camped outside, under the stars, though none found rest. The tomb loomed behind them, silent, watching. Darius recorded with a heavy heart, "The desert has devoured armies before. We walk the same path. We are not conquerors, we are prey." Above the tomb, perched upon its broken pillar, the raven watched in silence. By the 18th day, thirst had driven men to desperation. The last skins of water were empty, and their lips bled as they licked the dust from them. The desert had stripped them of dignity. Once proud soldiers now crawled like beggars, searching the sand for even a drop of dew. Some drank their own sweat, others their own blood. At dusk a soldier broke, seizing a comrade's skin. He bit at the leather like a rabid beast, even when told it was empty. The general's captains dragged him away, but soon more men fell into madness. They fought like animals, teeth and fists bared, not for glory but for thirst. Darius watched, ink-stained fingers trembling, as soldiers tore each other apart. He scrawled, "The desert does not strike with blade or storm. It drives us to kill ourselves." General Artemian tried to restore order. "We are warriors, not beasts," he roared, his sword flashing in firelight. but his voice cracked with the desperation of a man who knew his army was slipping from his grasp. That night, the camp was chaos. Men licked dew from stones, lapped at sand, hallucinating pools of water that vanished when touched. Some stumbled into the dunes, convinced they saw rivers shimmering under moonlight. None returned. Darius could barely hold his quill. His vision blurred from thirst, but still he wrote, "Our tongues are dust, our minds are dust. Soon we will be dust." And from above the raven glided silently, black wings blotting out the stars. The 19th night fell strangely calm. The wind stilled, the air cooled. For the first time in weeks, peace seemed to settle upon the army. Exhausted men collapsed into sleep, their bodies too weak to resist. But it was not peace. It was the desert's trick. As the soldiers slept, the whispers returned. They were no longer faint. They were a lullaby, soft and melodic. The men smiled in their dreams, hearing voices of mothers, wives, and children. Some reached out, speaking names, long forgotten. Darius sat awake, too haunted to sleep. He watched men rise from their blankets with serene smiles, walking quietly into the dunes, as though summoned by gentle hands. No cries, no panic, just surrender. He tried to rouse them, but they ignored him, their eyes glassy, fixed on the horizon. "Stop," Darius shouted, grabbing one soldier by the arm. The man turned to him with a smile. "They're waiting for me," he whispered, before slipping away into the night. Darius's quill scratched feverishly. The desert sings them away. It does not kill with violence. It kills with love. When dawn came, half the camp was gone. The desert had sung them to their deaths, leaving only fading footprints in the sand. Artemion stood at the edge of the camp, fists trembling at his sides, eyes hollow. For the first time, he said nothing. His silence was heavier than any command. Above him, the raven perched upon a broken spear, silent as the grave. The 20th day dawned blood-red, the rising sun casting the dunes in a crimson glow. The army, what was left of it, stirred uneasily. Something about the light felt wrong, as if the desert itself had been painted in blood. That morning, a soldier staggered into camp from the dunes. He had vanished the night before during the lullaby, yet here he was, alive. The men rushed to him, desperate for hope. But when he lifted his face, their hope curdled into terror. His eyes were clouded, milk-white, his skin pale as ash. Across his chest, carved into the flesh, was a symbol, a spiral, jagged and raw, as though burned by unseen hands. The soldier spoke with a hollow voice. "The desert marked me. It knows each of you. It waits." Then he collapsed, lifeless, his body crumbling into sand, as though it had never been flesh. The men recoiled in horror, shouting prayers, clutching charms. Some fell to their knees, convinced they too were cursed. General Artemion roared for silence, but his voice shook. Even he could not deny what he had seen. The spiral was no wound of man. It was the mark of something else. Darius, ink splattered from trembling hands, wrote, "The desert does not only take, it returns, but only to show us what awaits. Death is its language, carved into flesh." That night, none slept. They watched one another with wide, fearful eyes, waiting to see who would be marked next. And high above, the raven circled slowly, its shadow a spiral of its own, across the sand. By the 21st night, the desert no longer whispered, it sang. As the men huddled around weak fires, the wind rose. But it was not the howl of storms. It was voices, thousands of voices layered one upon another, rising and falling like a hymn, a choir. At first the men covered their ears, trembling. But soon some began to sway. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, wrapping around them like the arms of lost mothers and lovers. Tears streamed down hardened faces, as soldiers whispered the names of their dead. General Artemion shouted above the song, his voice raw, "It is a trick, do not listen." Yet even his captains faltered, their eyes glassy with longing. One by one, soldiers stood and walked into the dunes, singing softly with the choir. Their voices joined the wind, fading as they vanished into the night. Darius clutched his scroll, writing through tears. The desert sings with the voices of the lost. It calls us not with fear, but with love, and the men go willingly. Artemion struck down one soldier trying to leave, his blade flashing. But the man died with a smile, whispering, "I hear them." By dawn, hundreds more were gone. The army's strength was a shadow of itself, and as the first rays of sunlight spilled across the sand, the raven perched atop a dune and opened its beak. For the first time, it did not caw, it sang, a single human-like note that made even Artemion's blood run cold. On the 22nd day, hope appeared at last, or so it seemed. From the crest of a dune, a soldier shouted, his voice breaking with joy, "Water, a river." The men rushed forward, their hollow eyes lighting with desperate hunger. And there it was, an endless stream, cutting through the sand, shimmering under the sun. They screamed with relief, sprinting down the dunes, armor clattering. Some fell to their knees at the riverbank, plunging their faces into the water. Others waded in waist-deep, laughing as they drank. For the first time in weeks, laughter rang across the desert. But Darius hesitated. Something was wrong. He stepped forward, clutching his scrolls, and dipped a trembling hand into the water. His fingers came back dry. The river rippled, but it was not water. It was sand, fine, glistening grains flowing like liquid. The laughter turned to screams. Men coughed and choked as their mouths filled with sand. Others sank waist-deep, their bodies pulled under as if the river drank them whole. General Artemion roared for retreat, dragging men out by their armor, but too many were lost. The river surged like a living thing, swallowing dozens before collapsing into still dunes once more. Silence returned. The laughter was gone. Only the sound of choking remained. Darius, pale and trembling, wrote, "The desert offers mercy only to devour. Even hope is a trap." Above, the raven soared across the shimmering horizon, its shadow like a blade cutting through the false river. That night, the camp was in ruin. The river of illusions had broken what little hope remained. The men muttered curses, not against the desert, but against their leaders. The captains, once pillars of strength, now faced the wrath of their soldiers. "You lead us to death." One soldier spat, eyes wild. Another raised a spear. "You are no better than Artemion. You serve his madness." A riot broke. Soldiers clashed with their captains, fists and blades striking under moonlight. The desert echoed with shouts, the fragile thread of discipline snapping. General Artemion stormed into the chaos, his sword flashing. "Stand down," he roared, his voice like thunder. He cut through the mob, blood spraying across the sand. One by one, the captains fell, not by Artemion's hand, but by their own men. Betrayal cracked the heart of the army. When dawn came, the captains lay dead in the dust. Artemion stood over their bodies, his scarred face twisted in rage and sorrow. He had lost his lieutenants, his brothers in war. The soldiers, blood-stained and hollow-eyed, no longer looked to him with loyalty, only with fear. Darius wrote, his quill shaking, "The army has no leaders. The circle is broken. We follow not a general, but death itself." And on the ridge above the camp, the raven perched in silence, as though it had waited for this moment. By the 24th day, hunger gnawed at the men as mercilessly as thirst. Their supplies were long gone. The desert gave no fruit, no game, nothing but endless dunes. Starvation hollowed their cheeks and bent their spines. That night, the unthinkable happened. Around one of the dying campfires, soldiers fought over scraps of leather torn from armor. They chewed it raw, desperate for anything to fill their bellies. Others burned bones scavenged from the tomb ruins, sucking the blackened ash as if it were food. The air was filled with the sound of gnashing teeth, of madness. Then came the darker hunger. A soldier collapsed, too weak to rise. His comrades stared in silence. Then one stepped forward with a knife. Another followed. Soon the desert echoed with sickening sounds as starving men turned upon one of their own. General Artemion struck them down, roaring in fury. "You will not become beasts, but the look in the soldier's eyes told him it was too late. The desert had stripped them of humanity. Darius wrote with shaking hands, "The desert takes our food, our water, our hope. Now it takes our souls." When dawn came, the camp was silent, but the stain of what had been done clung to the men. None spoke of it, yet all knew. And above them the raven circled, its shadow falling like judgment. On the 25th day, Artemion snapped. He had held his army together through storms, whispers, shadows, and rebellion. But when he saw what his soldiers had become, starving beasts feasting in madness, his fury erupted like fire. At dawn, he gathered the remnants of the host. His scarred face was dark with rage. His voice thundered like a war god. "You shame the empire. You shame yourselves. If you will not march as men, then you will die as cowards." His captains were gone, his authority shattered, but his sword still commanded fear. When one soldier muttered defiance, Artemion struck him down in front of all. Blood sprayed across the sand. Another tried to flee. Artemion's blade cut him down as well. The survivors stared in silence. No cheers, no obedience, only hollow eyes. They followed because they feared him, not because they believed. Darius wrote with heavy heart, "The general leads not an army, but ghosts. His fury burns, but it is the fury of a man fighting against the inevitable tide of death." That night, Artemion stood alone on a dune, sword planted in the sand, staring into the endless horizon. He no longer looked like a commander. He looked like a man raging against gods he could not defeat. And far above, the raven soared, its cry echoing across the dunes, harsh, mocking, final. The 26th day began with broken silence. The army, what remained of it, marched like shadows under a burning sun. They were fewer now, little more than a column of walking corpses. Then betrayal struck from within. As Artemion scouted ahead with a small band, he returned to find chaos. A group of soldiers had seized the last wagon of provisions, dried husks of grain and fragments of water skins. They stood apart, blades drawn, refusing to share. Artemion thundered toward them, his sword flashing. "Drop it, or I'll cut you down." But one soldier stepped forward, gaunt yet defiant. "We've followed you into storms, shadows, and death. No more. You've doomed us, General. The desert doesn't kill us. You do." The mutineers raised their blades. In an instant the sand was stained with blood. Artemion fought like a beast, his rage burning brighter than the sun. He cut down 3 men before the rest scattered, leaving the wagon overturned, provisions spilling uselessly into the sand. The men watched in silence as their last food was lost to the desert. Hunger howled in their bellies. Darius dipped his quill into dried ink, scratching onto torn parchment. "The desert does not need to take from us. We destroy ourselves." Above the carnage, the raven circled, its shadow falling across the spilled grain like a final curse. That night, the desert turned black. The stars, once countless and bright, vanished from the sky as if swallowed by an unseen veil. Only darkness remained, endless, suffocating. The soldiers huddled close to their fires, but even the flames seemed weaker, struggling against the void above. The men whispered that the gods had abandoned them, that even the heavens turned their gaze away. Then came the voices, not whispers this time, not choirs, they were screams. The night filled with cries of agony, echoing across the dunes. Some swore they recognized the voices of their lost comrades, others heard loved ones. The darkness writhed with sound. Horses bolted in terror, vanishing into the void. Soldiers clutched one another, trembling. Artemion stood defiantly in the center, his sword raised toward the black sky. "Show yourselves," he roared, his voice breaking the silence between screams. But no answer came, only more wails. Darius's quill scratched. The stars are gone. The sky is blind. The desert screams with the voices of the damned. Men began to collapse, sobbing, tearing at their ears to block the noise. One soldier ran into the dark, swinging his blade wildly. He vanished in seconds. By dawn, the stars returned, but the army had grown smaller once more. And high above the camp, where the first light touched the dunes, the raven perched upon a spear, planted in the sand, its black feathers glistening as if mocking the survivors. On the 28th day, the desert revealed yet another horror. As the men trudged forward, one soldier collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach. Blood poured from his mouth, splattering the sand. Others rushed to help, but when his body fell, the sand beneath him turned dark, soaked not with water, but with blood. The desert drank greedily, the crimson sinking into the dunes, as if the ground itself thirsted. Moments later, another soldier collapsed, then another. Soon, screams rose across the ranks as men fell bleeding from unseen wounds. Panic spread like fire. Some clutched their throats, gasping. Others clawed at their skin, their blood seeping into the sand. No blade had touched them, no wound was visible, yet the desert fed upon them. Artemion staggered forward, roaring in rage, his sword buried in the sand. "You will not take them," he bellowed, as though challenging the land itself. But his fury could not stop the bleeding. Darius, pale and shaking, dipped his quill. "The sand drinks our blood. It does not wait for death. It harvests the living." By dusk, the ground was dark with stains that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Dozens were gone, swallowed not by storms or madness, but by the desert's thirst. Above the carnage, the raven soared in silence, its wings glinting red in the sunset. By the 29th day, the survivors were no longer soldiers, they were husks. Those who had not bled into the sand now marched like corpses, their faces gray, their eyes hollow. They no longer spoke, no longer prayed, no longer resisted. Their weapons dragged behind them, forgotten. Darius stumbled among them, ink running dry, his scrolls filled with words of despair. He looked at their faces and saw death walking. "They are not men anymore," he wrote. "They are shadows still wearing flesh." That night, as the army stopped to rest, the hollowed men revealed their fate. One by one they lay down in the sand. Their bodies did not convulse, did not scream. They simply exhaled and crumbled into dust, their armor clattering onto empty ground. The living screamed in terror, scrambling back from the dunes. But Artemion stood frozen, staring at the empty shells left behind. Darius wept as he recorded, "The desert does not slay with blade or storm. It waits, patiently, until men choose to lie down and become part of it." By dawn, dozens had dissolved into nothing. The survivors were fewer than ever, and on a nearby dune, the raven perched, silent and patient, as though waiting for its feast to end. On the 30th day, when hope was nothing but ash, a miracle appeared. The horizon shimmered with green palms swaying, water sparkling in the distance, an oasis. The men, broken and half dead, staggered forward, their cries torn between laughter and sobbing. For the first time in weeks, they ran. General Artemion himself, his armor rusted with blood and sand, spurred his horse ahead. Darius stumbled after, his parchments clutched to his chest. The oasis was real. They plunged into its cool waters, splashing, drinking, weeping. Some fell to their knees, pressing their lips against the pool, as though worshipping a god. Others tore fruit from the trees, their teeth sinking into flesh, sweeter than heaven. But as the sun sank, shadows lengthened, the laughter grew hollow. One soldier began choking, another dropped, his skin blistering. The fruit rotted in their hands, turning black and foul. The water darkened, thick and oily, swallowing the men who still drank. Their screams bubbled, muffled by the pool that dragged them under. Darius staggered back, ink splattering on his parchment. The oasis is no gift, it is a mouth. It feeds on the desperate. By dawn, the oasis was gone. Only dry sand remained where water once shimmered. No palms, no fruit, only silence, and the bones of those who had believed. And from the nearest dune, the raven perched, its beak wet as though it too had feasted. The 31st day broke with silence. The oasis was gone, the men were gone. Only a handful remained, staggering shadows of themselves. General Artemion stood among them, his cloak torn, his armor cracked, his eyes hollow, yet still he refused to bend. His voice rasped but carried iron. We march. The empire will not forget us. We march. But the men did not move. They stared at him with empty eyes, too broken to obey. Some fell where they stood, too weak to rise again. Others simply sat, waiting for the desert to finish its work. By midday, Artemion stood alone. His army, once 50,000 strong, was dust. Darius, the last to remain at his side, knelt in the sand, his hand trembling as he scrawled, "The general commands the dead. He is not leader of men, only of silence." Artemion lifted his sword to the blazing sun, his voice breaking into a hoarse cry. "Is this your will?" He roared at the gods. "Is this the fate of warriors?" The desert gave no answer, only the wind replied, carrying grains of sand across the corpses of the fallen. As dusk settled, Darius collapsed, his quill slipping from his hand. The last sound he heard before darkness claimed him was the raven's cry, echoing across the empty dunes. When Artemion turned, he was alone. The last scribe had fallen. Only he remained, sword planted in the sand, eyes staring at a horizon that promised nothing. Above him, the raven perched on his spear, watching silently. The 32nd day dawned with a sky like molten brass. The desert no longer felt like land. It felt like a throne of death, and Artemion its unwilling king. He stood alone among scattered armor and bones, the last symbols of his once mighty host. His cloak whipped in the wind, his sword planted in the sand like a crowned scepter. The desert mocked him with silence. Then he saw them figures rising on the dunes. At first, he thought his men had returned, but as they drew closer, his heart sank. They were hollow forms, made of sand and shadow, wearing the armor of his fallen. Their empty eyes gleamed with mockery. Darius's scrolls lay abandoned beside his lifeless body, fluttering in the wind. Artemion bent, lifting them with trembling hands. He read the words, ink smeared with sweat and tears. "The general commands not the living, but the dead." As the figures advanced, Artemion raised his sword. His voice cracked, but it thundered across the dunes. "If I am king of the desert, then let me wear its crown in blood." He charged into the hollowed forms, his blade striking with fury, but each one crumbled into sand the instant it fell, only to rise again behind him. No matter how many he struck, the army of shadows returned. His roars echoed into emptiness. His crown was not of gold, but of silence and endless sand. Above him, the raven circled, descending lower with each pass, as though waiting to claim its throne. The 33rd night fell heavy and black. The stars veiled once more. Artemion stood alone, his sword heavy, his body broken. His army was gone, his scribe gone, his captains gone. Only the desert remained, but he would not kneel. He planted his sword in the sand and stood before the shadows, his chest rising and falling like a beast's. The hollow army surrounded him, tens of thousands of figures, their ranks endless, silent as the grave. Artemion raised his voice for the last time. 50,000 marched into this desert. I remain. If the gods demand sacrifice, then let it be me. He tore his cloak from his shoulders, standing bare against the wind, and lifted his sword. With a roar, he charged into the shadows. The battle was madness. His blade flashed again and again, cutting through forms that fell only to rise again. His voice bellowed curses at gods and demons alike. His fury was fire, but the desert was endless water, swallowing it whole. Hours, or perhaps moments, passed. Time no longer mattered. When his sword finally fell from his grip, Artemion stood swaying, his body broken, but his eyes still defiant. The hollow army closed in. His last sight was the raven, descending from the sky, its wings blotting out the moon. Then the desert swallowed him whole. Dawn rose upon silence. The sand lay smooth, unbroken. No bones, no bodies, no trace of the 50,000, only wind, endless and eternal, and the raven's cry. The 34th dawn rose upon nothing. Where once an army had marched, there was only sand, smooth, untouched, as though no man had ever passed. No footprints, no armor, no weapons, no bones. The desert had erased everything. Travelers who came weeks later found silence, endless and perfect. They searched for signs of the 50,000, but there were none. They searched for Artemion, but he too was gone. Not a scrap of his cloak, not a shard of his blade. It was as if the army had been swallowed not just by the earth, but by time itself. Darius's scrolls too were gone, the words of the last witness erased, leaving nothing but rumor and legend. But some swore they heard things in the dunes at night, footsteps marching in rhythm, faint voices calling through the wind. Others claimed to see shadows moving at twilight, armies walking just beyond sight. And always, a raven circled above, its cry echoing across the barren horizon. The world would never find them. The desert had claimed its prize, and it left behind only a mystery. Generations later, the story of the vanished army lived on. Scholars debated, priests proclaimed, and wanderers whispered. Some said the desert had swallowed them in storms. Others believed the gods had cursed their pride. A few swore demons had feasted upon their souls, but no one ever found proof. The empire that had sent them forgot their names. Kings rose and fell, new wars were fought, but the tale of Artemion and his 50,000 never truly faded. It became more than history, it became myth. Travelers crossing the desert still speak of nights when whispers ride the wind, of shadows that follow in silence, of a raven's cry that pierces the soul. They tell of footsteps heard in the dunes, long after the living have gone to sleep. And some say the army still marches, trapped forever in the desert's embrace, neither alive nor dead, only echoes walking beneath an endless sky. The desert keeps its secrets. It needs no witness, no scroll, no monument. The only monument lies in silence, in the smooth sweep of dunes where men once believed they were immortal. And when the raven cries, it is not a sound of death, it is a reminder that all who walk the desert walk on borrowed time. And so, dear traveler, the army of 50,000 men was lost, not in battle, not in fire, not in glory, but in silence. An entire host, commanded by pride, and swallowed by a land that remembers everything yet leaves behind nothing. No bones, no swords, no graves, only dunes that shift endlessly, covering their story in layers of time. But listen closely, even now, when the wind howls across the desert, some say it carries the march of unseen feet. When the moonlight glimmers on the dunes, some claim they see shadows standing guard, waiting for orders that will never come. And when a raven's cry splits the night sky, perhaps it is not a bird at all, but the last echo of General Artemion's defiance. The desert does not give back what it takes, it gives only mystery, and in that mystery lies a truth. We are all footprints in the sand, waiting to be erased. Remember their story, for legends live only when they are spoken. And as you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself, when the desert calls your name, will you answer?